most people know me, though, as the first employee and the person that led sales at Outreach to about $230 million. I then, after I left Outreach, went to be the CRO at Catalyst, and it had taken them 5 years to get to $5 million. And in 16 months, I took them from 5 to 10 and got them acquired by a PE firm that owned one of their larger competitors to combine those two platforms, and decided that that space wasn't right for me anymore, so decided to do something else. But what I wanted to talk about today was at Outreach, there's kind of 7 phases of hiring as a founder. I think that they're very interesting to know and be aware of how do you think about hiring, especially in the go-to-market side, as you scale up. And then probably maybe more importantly is a sub-headline, which is how do you make sure that your sales leader is the right sales leader to grow with your organization so that you don't have to keep firing and rehiring people. I led sales at Outreach for the almost 8 years that I was there, and that consistency creates a huge competitive advantage against other people that are constantly churning and reintroducing new sales motions and new sales leaders and new sales cultures. So sometimes you do have to get rid of your sales leader early stage, but if you help them understand what they need to do to grow with the org, then you can keep that person and get those advantages. So this is Outreach's revenue growth right here. You can see when I started at 2014, I'd met Manny Medina, who's a CEO. We became friends. He asked me to help him with some sales calls. After a couple sales calls, I was like, why am I not selling Outreach? He said, we can't afford you. I said, I'll do 100% commission. He said, we can afford that. And I sold $1 million worth of Outreach at an outrageous commission rate in 6 months. We then took that revenue chart and then took that to the seed investors and got a big seed round. And then he asked me to build out the sales team, which I did until 2022. And you can kind of see the revenue growth there. I've overlaid that a little bit with some different types of sales leaders or sales leadership traits, or the kind of role a sales leader has to play during each phase of this. And we'll go over that. And just so you know, those are doer, builder, doctor, architect, and communicator. And the bigger your role, and the bigger your org, the more revenue you're responsible for. At the end at Outreach, I was doing $25 million a quarter. And the reason is because I had to immediately, I had to change roles. And right between 50 and 85, I had an identity crisis. I'd been very much a, what's the problem? Let's get in a room and figure it out. I'll help you execute it, and let's go. Well, all of a sudden, I'd hired a bunch of VPs who were smarter than me in their domain area. I had a smarter SMB guy than I was. I had a smarter enterprise guy than I was. I had a smarter mid-market guy than I was. And I was here trying to solve the problems of smarter people, which made no sense. So I had to reevaluate my role, and I worked with an executive coach and redefined what my value was to Outreach, which allowed us to then spring up to those other areas. And I went from the person that was the fixer and the implementer to a person that did 3 things. I clearly communicated my expectations. I clearly communicated the timeline on which I needed those expectations to be met. And I evaluated the mental model by which people created solutions to create those outcomes. And when I did that, that's when I went from being a VP or whatever to an executive, and I felt like I was really helping Outreach again. So we'll talk about some of those changes along the way. And I got some fun pictures in here. So 2014, I get started. I'm on commission only. I'm in San Francisco. This is a picture taken from a guy named Jason Vargas's apartment. We were so poor at this time at Outreach. We hadn't raised any money. We had about $50,000 left in the bank. I had to call people and be like, can I stay with you for a week so I can do sales calls? And so this is outside Jason Vargas's apartment. Still love Jason Vargas, great guy. And listen, the first thing that you have to hire for is you have to hire the first. Right? And the first is a very, very important person. Most companies that I advise or consult, and I do with early stage, this is the first problem that they have, is they mishire the first. The first has to be a doer. That means that you can't be just a seller, and it means that you just can't be a planner. There's kind of 3 kinds of hires that you have to have, or 3 types of first hires that you can hire. One is just the seller, and you have to decide on this before you hire. Listen, your job is just to sell. You don't sit in on product meetings. You don't go to the board meetings. Your job is to sell. The second one is you're head of sales. In other words, I need you to sell, but also need you to kind of build out and create some processes because I want you to build out a team. And then the third is like the commercial co-founder. That's the person that's going to help run the business, sit with the co-founders. At Outreach, Manny Medina made it very clear to me that my job was a head of sales. I didn't go to board meetings. I didn't talk to the investors. I didn't do stuff with product. All I did was concentrate on go-to-market and selling, and that's one reason why, in the last couple months of 2014, we did about $250K in ARR, and then we quickly jumped to $2.5 million the next year, because all I had to do was think about building out sales and doing deals, right? So after you get to the first, then the first has to build out a team. And this is our fun little office in State College, Pennsylvania. Most people don't know. The first probably 20 sales hires at Outreach were in a tiny town in the middle of Pennsylvania that were all late 30, early 40-year-olds with kids and my friends. And guess what? This was the best job they ever had, and they all worked hard. They all gave a shit. And guess what that meant? That meant that we had explosive growth, and we had a ton of fun doing it together. And so you have to go, though, from being a doer as a sales leader to being a builder at that point. Like, how do you build a culture? How do you build a process? How do you build a team? And so that's a very important thing, is the first team. The first hire sets the tone. And you have to be really, really careful with your first hire. If your first hire can't hire first team members from people that they know, then they shouldn't be your first sales hire, unless you're just hiring a seller, right? The reason for that is simple, is when you are getting started, there's a lot of variables. Do we have product market fit? Is our pricing and packaging right? Are we going to go down tomorrow? One variable you can eliminate is, do I know the people I'm working with? And do I trust them? And I was lucky, my first 4 AEs all lasted 4 years at Outreach minimum. The first one left because she got a job offer for 2x what I could pay her, and I told her she had to go. She's now my COO at Operator. We've reconnected. The other 2 retired as reps at Outreach after 6 years because they made so much money, and both of them went on to be pastors, oddly enough. And then the last one is still one of the top 3 AEs at Outreach, and just closed like $8 million last year. So the reason why that is because we were all together. We all knew each other. I knew them. They knew me. I didn't have to worry about half the stuff a normal sales leader did. Did I have to worry that Pleasant was working when I wasn't watching her? Hell no, I didn't, because I'd worked with her for 5 years, and I knew she would work. I hired a guy that ran a coil machine at a 3M factory to make school notebooks. That was one of our top sellers. He closed ZoomInfo for over $1 million within his second year at being at Outreach. I hired a guy that sold cleaning services and cleaned banks. And you know what? He turned out to be one of the Outreach legends too. So, you have to make sure that your first team is cohesive and probably, I would say, maybe necessarily linked to the leader that's hiring them in some other way and has some kind of relationship. If your first hire can't hire their first team of people they know, you probably don't have your right first hire. So we got to $2.5 million, and then we went to 10 million. And I call this stopping the cry for mercy. And so a lot of people think at Outreach we had tons and tons of money. We actually didn't in the beginning, and we had to make we had to be very careful. It was much more aligned in the beginning. Now later we had tons of money. We could just throw it around. But in the beginning we had to be very careful with the money. And so one of the things that I did is rather than hiring ahead of time, what I would do is I monitor something called active open opportunities. And what I found was around 25 active open opportunities in a rep's pipeline, all of a sudden their win rate would go down, their ACV would go down, and their sales cycle will go up. Guess what that means? We have too many deals to work them the right way. So once we got to 25, I would push them a couple deals more than that, and then I would hire another rep into the pipeline that was already there. And rather than hiring reps and hoping I find pipeline to fill them or asking them to fill it on their own, what we did at Outreach is we created enough opportunities until we had the ability to hire somebody to hold those opportunities. So it's the exact opposite. And literally, I'll still remember a meeting with my sales team. It was on a Monday morning. I was in State College. We had a couple people remote, a couple people in State College with me. And I'll never forget, they're like, Mark, you need to hire another rep. And I'm like, why? Aren't you guys making money? What do you want to do? They're like, no, we have too many ops. We're working too hard. We need help. And that's what I called the cry for mercy. And after that, we kind of set that active open opportunities thing. And you still need the builder here. The builder, again, is the person that is, building out the team, building out the culture, building out the processes. He or she is also in deals and still selling, right? There's a little doer. If you think about a contractor building a house, there's the person that's doing the drywall, and then there's the person that gets into the drywall when they need help, right? But mostly what that other person is doing is like looking at the plans and making sure everything's happening the right way. So you still need a builder. This was actually outside one of our first $500,000 deals when we closed MindBody in San Luis Obispo, which is a great place to sell if you've never been there. Then 2017, the next thing you need to do is, now that you get to a certain point where hiring a cry for help becomes unsustainable, because the cries for help come so fast that you just need to start to get ahead of it. And that's when you start hiring for capacity. And hiring for capacity means, all right, I need to go from 10 to $25 million. I need to hire enough reps to be able to handle $15 million of increased ARR. And that's when you go from being, as a sales leader, from a builder to a doctor. Because what you're going to do in this stage, this to me is like the hardest stage. This is the biggest transition. This is the one that most people screw up, and I'll tell you the next phase in a second, because it's always a result of this phase every time I talk to a company that's gone through this. And so the doctor's job is, what is the problem? Let me give you a prescribed fix for it. And this is what I was saying, where I kind of got stuck at outreach for a little while. I was like, oh man, I can diagnose a problem. Give me the numbers. Let me take a look at it. All right, here's the fix. Let's implement it. Let's measure it. Make sure it's working, and double down on if it's not. If it isn't working, let's trash it and figure out something new. And so you have to hire ahead in order to create that capacity, and then you try to build the demand to fill it, which is the exact opposite of what you do up till $10 million, in my personal opinion and in my experience with a lot of companies. And so, this is us at a huge all hands with this entire sales team, and I think CS and marketing teams in Seattle, learning command of the message, which was the way that we do value communication. If you don't know command of the message, they're an unbelievable organization. But got to hire for capacity next. That got us to about $25 million at outreach. In 2018, we had to hire to catch back up. The first time we hired for capacity, we didn't really know what kind of rep we needed, and we hired all wrong. You know what I thought I needed? Reps that were #1 at good brands that knew how to sell. You know what I figured out didn't work? People that were at #1 at good brands that knew how to sell. And you know why? Is because outreach wasn't a brand. It was a nothing. It was just a movement. And what I did is I looked at my best sellers, and you know what they were? They were evangelists. They were John the Baptist. They had honey and locusts in their teeth and loincloths around their groins. They would get out there and they'd be like, you saying outreach doesn't work, motherfucker? I'm going to show you it works right now. Let me show you how I got you on the phone. And they'd open up the platform and be like, look, I sent you 17 emails and made 13 phone calls. Like, it didn't work. It worked on you. What are you talking about? And like, they would get passionate. We have a saying at outreach, let your passion overcome your professionalism, right? And that's what we had to do is we screwed up. We hired a bunch of professionals and not a bunch of passionate people. And we still needed passionate people. There's so many people in this picture that are millionaires now because of how much money that they sold at outreach. And we had to catch back up because we made so many mistakes hiring the wrong people. The only thing that kept me afloat were some of my first sellers that were so overproducing that kept us going, but it allowed me to hire to catch back up. So this is a phase you want to avoid, but I found very few companies that can avoid it. Is the first time you start to hire for capacity, you will mishire. Just realize it quickly what's going on, and then you got to kind of hire to catch back up, which is, at this point we're probably onboarding between 2 and 3 reps a month, every single month, which is almost a full-time job as a leader. And that's when you go from doctor to architect. Because now what you're doing is you're not diagnosing what's wrong. You're no longer looking at the plans and building. You're no longer doing the work. You're the one that's responsible for the blueprints. And that means that you need to start looking out multiple quarters. That means that you need to start understanding what are the pluses and minuses. You need to start working interdepartmentally with your marketing team way closer, with your CS team way closer, with your product team way closer. And that architect allows you to create, sheets, plans, resources, and all that kind of stuff that the new org that you're starting to create can start to use to be, so that you don't always have to be there all the time in order for things to happen. That got us to about $50 million. Well, what really got us to $50 million was my first 4 core sellers and a couple good hires that we made that bought me time to make up for this horrible mistake we made. Now that you're starting to hire for capacity, now again that you're starting to catch back up, the next thing is you have to build an organization. And an organization is a very interesting thing, right? It is made up of frontline leaders, but when I start to say when you build an organization, that's when you're starting to build a second line. All of a sudden, I went from knowing every single seller, all of their kids, what they cared about, been working deals with them for months or years, to all of a sudden there'd be somebody I passed in the office and I'd be like, who's that? And they'd be like, that's the new AE I hired 6 months ago. And I'd be like, oh shit. But this is where, to me, culture takes over. Culture becomes the engine, and that's what is the thing behind an organization is culture. And at Outreach, we were really lucky. We hired people that were either additive to culture that we wanted or reinforced culture that we had. And so I had, at this point, I had 4 VPs that were all very much smarter, like I said, in their subject matter areas. And they all had a distinct flavor, but you could tell it was the same thing. It was like the difference between Diet Coke, Coke, and Cherry Coke. It's all still Coke, but it's a little bit different for a little bit different folk, right? And like my SMB guy, who was doing, $12,000, $15,000 deals in 30 days or less, he had a very different culture than my strategic guy that was doing, $1 million deals over 9 to 12 months. But still, when we would progress somebody up through the different segments, it felt familiar, but there was a nuance. Like my mid-market leader, who was here in New York City, he had an awesome team meeting every Tuesday. It was like I would go to it just because I got good vibes from it. My enterprise leader, he didn't do that. My mid-market leader hired in New York City because he loved people coming into the office. My strategic leader hired remote. But you know what? If you went from one team to the next, it still felt familiar. It was just a little different. And so building an organization and hiring for an organization is about hiring those second-line leaders, those directors, those VPs, however you structure it, that can help build on the foundational culture that you're already in, and that's how you build an organization. Otherwise, what you end up is you build out organizations, and there's different these little fiefdoms where everybody's doing. I can tell you, we still talk fairly regularly. Me and 3 of those VPs, we all will say that was probably the best 4-year run of our entire careers. We had so much fun. We helped each other out so much. We learned so much. So you gotta, in order to start to get to 100 million, you have to have an organization filled with second-line leaders that can create their version of your culture, but it still feels good. And this probably is an encapsulation of our culture. This picture is one of my favorite pictures ever. When I moved to Seattle to start to build out the sales team in Seattle, these were my 3 of my first Seattle hires. All 3 of them ended up being top 5 AEs at Outreach, and some of them have formed their own companies and a couple other things, but unbelievable culture. We crushed it there. And then the last is, and this might seem late stage, and it depends on your business, but at some point you have to hire to go up market. And I'm telling you, hiring to go up market is the biggest change that you'll make in any company ever. We had a saying at Outreach with my VP of Enterprise Sales. His name was Chris Albro. It was called Enterprise State of Mind. We walk around with T-shirts. We made banners. We would go up and bust into meeting rooms and be like, Enterprise State of Mind, and close the door. I mean, we were like on a mission to help the company understand that we would not go up market because we hired experienced enterprise sellers. We would only go up market if everybody decided their job was to help us go up market. We needed marketing, finance, business ops. We need everybody to help us do this. And that's when you become a communicator. And that's when that's to me is like the final step, is when you start to get to a place where your leader is someone that can communicate clearly what's going on, bring people together, and start to change what's happening inside of an organization. And I don't think that there's any change bigger. And listen, most technologies now are disruptive. They're not unique. Disruption is proven to be most effective starting in SMB and lower mid-market and moving your way up, because most of the incumbents have started to not care so much about that part of the business because it's a little more volatile. And so your company will surround itself with what made it successful to go in those low market areas. And in order to go up market, you have to completely change the entire company's outset. I will tell you that I will feel like we were mildly successful with this at Outreach. And we had probably, by the time I was done, 5 customers that were spending over $10 million with us. So we did have some big ones, but this took us way too long. It was way too hard, and it was probably the hardest thing that I did at Outreach, and I'd give myself maybe a C- on it. So anyway, that's kind of how to think about hiring as you're moving through the different stages of revenue. These revenue things are obviously contextual to me in my experience, but I will tell you, in the dozens of companies that I've helped out in my time at Outreach as customers and other relationships I've had with them, that progression of your sales leader is something that you can 100% coach and help with to create that consistency that gives you that competitive edge. if you end up trying to say, well, what got us here won't get us there, and you're constantly churning sales leaders, like I hate to say it, but Outreach is already on their 3rd sales leader post me, and it's only been 2 years. You think they got any kind of consistency there? You think they got any kind of culture there? No. I get calls every single day about people crying about what they used to have and what they want, right? And so you have to be really careful, because if you constantly churn a sales leader, that means that your sales org will be in shambles, in my opinion. And so make sure that you're growing that sales leader along through these 7 stages of hiring. So thanks so much, y'all.